Hello, everyone, and welcome to Reality. My name is William, and I'm here with Lev.
Hey everyone.
Today, we're going to talk about Edward Snowden and whether he should be pardoned by President Trump. In case you're not aware, Edward Snowden used to be an NSA contractor, and he exposed some programs that were used to mass surveil American citizens by collecting their data online. And then the government charged him with violating the Espionage Act and stealing government property. And there's been some calls to have him pardoned, and we're going to consider whether that's a valid question and whether he should be pardoned or not. Do you have anything to add to that intro?
I think it's important to remember that we're just looking at what are reasons why he should or should not be pardoned. We're not going to get into details of exactly the nature of what he did, just only insofar as we need to know if he should be pardoned or not. Also, we should remember what pardoning would mean in this context. It's really just the power granted by the Constitution to the president to pardon really anyone. The way it's written in the Constitution, I'll read it out. He shall have the power to grant reprieves and pardons for offenses against the United States, except in cases of impeachment. So this is the sort of power we're discussing about the president and whether that should be granted. That reprieve or pardon should be granted to Snowden.
Right. And I'll add that after listening to Edward Snowden, I heard him say that he hasn't asked for a pardon. So this isn't something that is coming from him. It's coming from people who agree with his views and what he did and think that he should just be forgiven for any crimes, any legal violations he committed in the process of exposing these programs.
But to begin with, I would say he should be pardoned. I think it's an easy conclusion to reach, really just from his intention as defending the rights of the people of the United States and oversight against malicious intent within the government. And not only that, it's like he has evidence for it. It's not just an accusation. He has evidence, presented evidence, and people see what that evidence is. So it's not a nature of like a conspiracy where it's just an accusation. You've got material to actually judge and think about here.
Right. And another major aspect is his motive, because when you're dealing with such a high crime as espionage, usually these acts are committed for some grand motive or reason, either to help your nation or to hurt another nation. And in this case, I think Snowden's motive was pretty good, at least from what I've heard from him himself, particularly in his recent interview with John Stossel. For example, he gave his motive as exposing the lies that the government was telling the public about what they do in private. So if your government's lying to you, that's a big issue. I can see some cases where it might be necessary, but in this case, I don't think their lies were motivated by honest intentions or a good a good purpose for lying. So I tend to think that Snowden's right, that the government was lying to cover up what they're actually doing with these programs. For example, they were claiming that the programs would catch terrorists and stop terrorist plots. And I think that's been shown to be not true. And generally, I think the motive here is just to gather intelligence on people and create a profile of them so that they can use that information against people. It's basically a means for them to control the American people. And I think that's a bad purpose. I think it violates rights. And I think Snowden was correct to expose this program.
Well, why would it violate rights exactly? I mean, it's a violation, I guess you could say, because you don't like it happening and you don't want it to happen, but is that really a violation of rights? I mean, you might not say their motivations are good or desirable, but is it still a violation of anything? You might not approve of them, you might look down on them, but why should you view that as a violation? It seems like you could say that it's an inconvenience rather than a violation.
Well, that's a great question. It's a difficult one to answer. I think it gets down to your property rights in whatever you're producing. So if you're producing some content on social media, you have a certain right to that information that you're producing and control of that information. So if you're, and there's also a problem here entangled with the government ownership of public property. So, which I recognize, I accept some public property, but I think that there needs to be regulations of how the government can use the information you send over property of any nature, either if it's like the phone lines or the fiber optic cable lines, or if you're just sending information through Google or whatever. I think you need to have a right to say, I'm allowing Google to use this information, but I'm not allowing the government to take it. So when Google secretly gives that information to the government because they've been ordered to secretly, I think that causes a violation of your right to control the use of your product.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, I'm inclined to agree with that I do think privacy is at least information you generate ought to be controlled by you, because it's like a product of your behavior and mind that you should have at least a say in the way it's distributed, used, and consumed, in the same way that you'd have a right for intellectual property or physical property, that they're your property, your creations, and you could dictate how they're used. The problem with Snowden here, I think maybe you pointed out indirectly, like if you're a problem with Google, then sue Google. Why would it be a good legal maneuver to go to just leak it out into the public? You don't want to just release it out. Or if you did just release it, it would seem like it would be out of control, that you don't want, you could sue Google, sure, because there's legal mechanisms to deal with it. You go through the courts, you have a judge, you have a process of gathering evidence and having lawyers and all that. But with the law, as far as Snowden, he took the law into his own hands. He decreed that not only would he forget the private enterprise, he's just revealing the government without their knowledge or awareness, or no legal mechanism. He took it upon himself to release it without any oversight or any other committees. What would you say about that?
I'd say there's a couple issues there, and some of them Snowden brought up himself. One is that how would you sue Google over them giving your information to the government when that hasn't been proven? I mean, it's a secret. So
right.
You'd have to first expose the fact that Google is being compelled to give your information to the government. The other one is, I think, has to do with the government involvement with business. Like I was saying before, when you mingle government with um, like public property or anything like that, since Google uses transmission lines and sends signals out everywhere throughout public space, they're kind of regulated by the government. So the government has power over Google. So Google is under this threat of force from the government to comply with whatever the government needs or wants or requests. So let's imagine that Google denied the government, said, we're not going to comply with your little program there to mass surveil the American public. Then what does the government do? And the government might make life hell for Google and threaten to sue them or use antitrust against them or whatever. So we don't know. We don't really know. And part of my problem is I don't know all the facts in this case. I don't know what pressures Google are under. I don't know what everything the government has done. We only know what Snowden exposed. So we only have a small picture of the problem here. But I think it relates to the government having the ultimate control and power to use force against companies like Google and individuals like Snowden.
Another thing we could ask is, why did Snowden just leak everything? Why didn't he go through better channels to get that information out there? Like, why couldn't he just use a whistleblower rule or something like that? Or if there were none that he could use, why couldn't he just go to some other government employee?
Yeah, well, he's in his interviews, he said that he tried talking to his fellow employees, and most of them warned him against using the whistleblower because in the past, with cases like Thomas Drake, nothing was accomplished and the government just used their force on him and raided his house and took his property. So he was wary of trying to go that route from past examples that didn't work. Also, another problem he mentioned was that he wasn't an actual employee of the government. So he couldn't use the whistleblower law because it applied to government employees only. He was a contractor for the NSA. He was an actual employee. So I guess there's a couple reasons he gave. I haven't looked into all the details of that, but it sounds all right. I mean, it makes sense to me. I think he listening to some of his morality, it sounds like he thinks of himself as making a sacrifice for the good of the nation, which is a little altruistic, and I have a problem with that. But I think he may just be misinterpreting his own actions. I think he had a sense that this was wrong, that what they're doing is really bad, and it needed to be corrected, and he was willing to take the hit, in order to expose the problem.
It would make me wonder, though, why does he need to be pardoned necessarily? In a way, sometimes, you do take a hit. You do commit something illegal, and that's just what it is to respect the authority of the law, that even if individually we may suspect this is absolutely the right answer, we don't want vigilantism to take over. What makes it so that Snowden should get scot-free away from it? Or why should he be pardoned? Yeah, we can acknowledge that he was just in doing it, but does that mean he should escape the consequences of other, say, aspects of what he did? I mean, it's not just revealing the government's doing bad things, but he is also revealing U.S. strategy against foreign enemies. regardless if you agree with it or not, it's still a strategy to beat terrorists and foreign enemies, domestic and abroad. The question would be, should Snowden still get out of punishment, even if those other justified reasons for having secret intelligence operations? Why should he have the right to, he as a contractor, violate these secrecy and protection that agencies probably should have? You don't want everyone just blabbing immediately the moment they feel or believe something went wrong. They need to go through a court or whatnot. So my question really is, should he be pardoned versus just we acknowledge what he did, but also there are harms as well?
Yeah, well, that's a hard question to answer, and which is probably why it's so rare that the pardon power is used. But I think it's there for a reason, and that's because sometimes we have to recognize that the law isn't always going to be perfect, and sometimes people need to break the law in order to change society and change how things work. People just kind of go along with the government and with the laws, and they don't really realize that something's terribly wrong until someone steps out into the open and says, I'm breaking this law because it's wrong, or I'm telling you about this top secret program because I think it's wrong. And I think you asked how are we going to prevent this from like cascading into anyone can just release whatever information they want. And I think the way you do that is to put it in context. You show that what Snowden did was exceptional. It's not the normal situation where someone's giving information to giving top secret information away willy-nilly for just whatever reason. In Snowden's case, he thought that this was a major violation of privacy rights, and he makes an argument, and you can agree or disagree with it. But if you agree with it, let's say you're President Trump and you agree, you come to the conclusion that Snowden did expose a major violation of privacy rights. Well, that's something that is very beneficial to a nation that respects privacy rights. And so that context should prevent the pardon from becoming an excuse for anyone to just expose top secrets.
I think that's true. And that is the sort of thing that prevents just willy-nilly exposure, that there is some principle here that Snowden is using. I think my bigger issue isn't so much that, like, pardon makes sense to me because Snowden is expressing interest in rights and respecting the rights of individuals within the country. My main issue, I think, is that I don't think this is the best mechanism that should exist in the Constitution to deal with this. I think it's one of those situations where the Constitution can't deal with it, or at least it's one of those open-ended things in the Constitution that could not have been predicted, and there should be some other check on power within espionage agencies. There were no espionage agencies mentioned in the Constitution, and those seem to be operated by very different standards. There should be different kinds of checks and balances. But because I think with Snowden, he had no outlet. There was no clear answer what to do. You can't tell the NSA that the NSA is doing things wrong because they believe they're doing it right. That they believe they're justified in their espionage. And he can't go to someone else because it's illegal to tell them because it's supposed to be secret. he can go to a congressional oversight committee. But again, there's probably espionage there too. That we know the NSA lied to Congress about what they were doing. They lied that they said they weren't collecting data on everyone, but they were. So there's no real check on power that Snowden could use. No matter what, he'd be screwed. Either he goes to jail or he does nothing. There is no way to deal with the problem. Either ignore it or go to jail. That's his options, but neither seems justified. And at least in the meantime, a pardon could be a way out for that. But there's probably better solutions in the future.
That's a major problem, is the checks and balances. The founders created the three branches of government to check and balance each other. But when you're dealing with checks within one branch, it's hard to do, because you have to have someone at the top. You can't just keep having someone above the other person. It can't be an infinite top level of oversight. There has to be the top level. So if the top level is corrupt, and in Snowden's case, he was saying they're more worried about the reputations than being right, than being like constitutionally correct. So if you have the top level that's corrupt and doing bad things, where do you go? You have to go to the bottom level. You have to take it to the people. So that's what he did. And that's one of the, I would call it an intrinsic problem with power, is that there has to be a top level. And if that top level is corrupt, you have nowhere else to go but down. So,
well, I think laterally would make sense if you had other branches, and that's why the Constitution has other branches. I think that's part of it. But if there are no branches, if the NSA doesn't branch out, it's just almost insulated. It's its own standards, its own operations, and it doesn't obey anyone. It has no oversight. It has no checks. It's supposed to be secret. So how could you check something if what it does is supposed to be secret and you don't know what it does? It makes its own decisions, and of course it's going to get corrupt at some point. It has no objective way of viewing itself.
I guess it has some checks in the Congress. So the legislature has an oversight committee, and they have to go to a secret court to get judicial orders. But if some problem happens with that system, where do you go? So I don't know what the solution is, other than to go to the people, take it to the press, which is what Snowden did. He took it to the journalists.
Yeah, that might be true. I mean, I don't know if there's other solutions other than, you don't want to just make more branches of government for each and every problem necessarily. I mean, I do think maybe at some level, yeah, journalism is the answer, and that is the check. People get mad at it or they demand change. I mean, that seems to be more what is supposed to go on. That you don't just add another branch, you just deal with the people directly at some point.
Yeah, if two checks don't work. So Snowden pointed out that the NSA was lying to Congress. So if Congress gets lies and can't adequately uncover them and fix the problem, then you got to go to the courts. And if the courts don't really know what's going on and don't really have a problem with the law, and they're just following the law as legislature enacted it, then he has nowhere else to go. If he really thinks that there's a problem with the program and the law and the oversight, he's got to appeal to the people, and hopefully they'll get new representatives or put pressure on the representatives to make changes.
Yeah, and I think the pardon itself creates a motivation at times that you could take the risk and come out alive, so to speak. You could take the risk, go around everything, just go straight to the people, and this is like acknowledging the exception that can happen on occasion. And you need that incentive, at least, that you'll be okay if you did it. There's a possibility you'll be okay. You're not just guaranteed to be thrown in jail or executed for treason. There's some kind of recourse here that the president could grant, I guess, almost as if he were the people. Because, I mean, elected by the people. If you grant the pardon, then it's like the people deciding to grant the pardon. But maybe there's better ways, but I think a pardon is actually important to allow people to feel safe to some extent in revealing the truth.
Well, he suffered a lot, many
True.
years of exile. But I think there is some progress or improvement to be made in the whistleblower laws. Maybe it could be extended to contractors. I don't know how all of that works exactly, but I do agree that something needs to change so that genuine whistleblowers who aren't interested in hurting the country, but are trying to help it, even if they're wrong, if they're wrong thinking and don't understand what's going on, there should be some mechanism for them to feel safe in exposing this stuff to journalists. At least maybe there should be like a college of journalists who are allowed information, top secret information, to judge whether the people should hear this stuff. That's just a off the top of my head idea. You could probably come up with something way better.
That sounds interesting. Like just like the idea that like a set of journalists deciding the truth and to reveal to like a national journalist association. I don't know. It just sounds interesting.
They would obviously have to be highly qualified and highly patriotic.
Yes.
You couldn't just let anyone be on this secret journalist group.
I think in the end, I really do think Snowden should be pardoned, and it's justified in this case because I don't think there's any other recourse for Snowden. Anything else he could have done, given the situation, I think, and he was justified in doing it. I mean, of course, you can't just do it whenever you feel like it, but I think he actually had justification. And he did use his own judgment appropriately. Is there anything else you would add to his case?
I think we said it all pretty much. I think we mentioned all the positive things in his favor. Generally, I think he exposed something the average person was unaware of, and maybe more people are now aware of the extent to which their data is being used and collected by the government, and that's a good thing. It's helping people learn ways to protect their privacy, including something like end-to-end encryption, which Snowden mentions. So there's measures that the public can now take in order to prevent this invasion of their privacy, and that, if anything, that was something valuable Snowden did for us. And I think that ultimately it will be shown that the government has been violating our privacy rights for a long time and in many nefarious ways, and some of that's being exposed now, and it's probably just the tip of the iceberg. And so just for that reason alone, for the value he's created for the public, I think he should be pardoned.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think that's a good place to stop. I pretty much agree with you. I don't see anything I would disagree with.
Great. It was great talking to you on this topic, and I look forward to the next one.
Yep. Bye, everyone.